Hello. Today I want to demonstrate how we can use Git repositories to also take snapshots of data in the database. So right now I'm logged in with a user that has a OpenRPA workflow. Actually, it has a project and two RPA workflows. And one of these workflows also have an image because it was recorded using the recorder. So we do have version history. We can go back and forward in time and see what has changed, but first of all, this is not 100% guaranteed that it can actually restore the object. It is version history, not version control. But it can also be very hard to track because every time you make a change, it gets saved inside here because this is meant for audit trailing. So if you want a backup at a certain point in time and think of it as a version, it might make sense to have a way of taking a backup or a snapshot or whatever you want to call it of multiple objects at a certain point in time. So if we go to Git repositories and we create a new repository, let's call it snap. So what I can do is there we go. I can create a new repository and I can add it to OpenFlow. There we go. So I now have a README file inside an empty Git repository. Well, it's not empty, it has a README, but you get it. So what I can do is I can create a new file and I can call this file objects.json. And this file needs to include a JSON array with a lot of objects, or one or more objects. And each object can contain a collection, which is the name of the collection that I'm interested in. And it can contain either IDs, which will be an array of IDs that I'm interested in, or it can contain a pipeline, which will be a MongoDB aggregation pipeline describing, a query that gets some objects from that specific collection. So the trick that I'm using here is that instead of defining IDs, actually let's do that. So the proper way you would probably do that is you will go and say, oh, I have a project here called a new project. So what I would do is I would go inside here and say I want a pipeline that says match. And I want to match something where project ID equals what happened there. And I also need, and then I could make a query that gets all of it, or I can simply go in and say IDs is an array with the ID of the project file. There we go. I'm not sure if I like this, but whatever. So I have now selected that I want the project, and I have a match that says give me everything that is using this project ID. So as you can see inside here, we have a project ID that matches that project. So if I push this to my Git repository, what you will see is we now get two extra buttons. I get a snapshot button and a restore button. And what will happen is if I then take a snapshot, it will go and run those queries for getting the IDs or running the pipelines, and it will then compare with the current branch and commit that you are in and see if something is missing or updated, and will then update the Git repository with those informations. So it scanned 5 objects and it inserted 5 objects. So if I say git fetch and pull, I now have 2 folders. I have an OpenRPA folder that contains the project and the workflows, and I have a fs.files folder that contains the image that was inside one of those workflows. So I now have a complete backup of what's going on, and I can also, see it inside my Git repository in the browser if that is what I want. So I could go inside here and I can click one of them and see what's inside it. And that means that if I by accident at some point delete some of this, oh no, what will I do? Well, I could go up here and I could restore it, but that is super annoying. Or I could basically go inside here and say restore, and then if I reload here, I now have my workflows back. And if you had deleted this in OpenRPA, this would also have removed the files that were associated with those workflows. But by using the restore function of the snapshot, it will now also restore those files. I now have a complete backup of everything that I want. This, of course, is also super handy if you're working with Node-REDs. I'll show that in a different video. But basically, if you have a Node-RED, or if you want to bundle that snapshot with a Node-RED, what you would do is, quickly. So if I say add agent, and this is a Node-RED. Oh yeah. Stop. Come on. Oh my God. There we go. So if I have a Node-RED running, come on, be nice. There we go. And I add something. By the way, a new version of Node-RED was just launched, which also supports multiple users working inside a Node-RED. And the newest images for running Node-RED inside OpenFlow now are using multiplayer, as they call it. That is enabled by default inside Node-RED. So you can now keep track of who else has this Node-RED open and what tabs they are working on. That is a quite nice feature. Anyway, so we now have that Node-RED, and we know that the Node-RED ID is this, right? So if we go here, you can see the Node-RED ID is this auto-generated ID. So if I want to add that to my snapshot, where did my Visual Code go? There we go. So I can go into the Node-RED collection and say, please get everything that has that Node-RED ID. So when, for instance, right now I don't have, where did it go? Node-RED. So as you can see, I have settings, session, and flows. Perfect. And if I then say up, and I take a snapshot. So what we can see is that we now have these three objects that was part of that Node-RED. But what happens then is later when we add credentials, so let's say that I add this request here. There we go. So what happens is that these credentials are now saved in a credential objects inside the database. So if you were picking the IDs, you would be missing this in your next snapshot. But because we're taking by ID, by the Node-RED ID, what happens now is that if I take a new snapshot, it will now have the credentials as well. Another cool thing about using Git for keeping track of the versions is that what I can do now is, I don't have that extension installed. I love this extension, it's so awesome. If I go in now and look at the history, I can actually see what had changed. So for instance, this workflow where I added a node, we can actually see the changes really easily and compare them and see what happened over time. So having Git for this also has a lot of convenience in keeping track of what is going on over time. And again, you can always check out and go back in time. The same goes for the repo. So if you select, let's say this version, and I say restore, it will restore to that point in time into the database. Yeah, this was a little bit messy. I should probably have prepared it, but I still hope it made sense, and I still hope you found it interesting. And I would love some feedback on whether this is useful or interesting or missing something, either in the comments or on the forum. Thank you.